So it begins.
Everything feels different. No, I'm just kidding. It doesn't. It feels okay.
Oh.
Well, it was interesting because I just throwing this out there as a realization, we can go wherever we want. I kept racking my brain just a few minutes ago because I was like, where did I read that people were annoyed with social workers and they just project their anger onto social workers and blah, blah, blah. And that's what I wrote in our document about being frustrated with a social worker that my mom used to work with, because I had that phone call this morning, and the social worker just drive me crazy. They think that if they put sad comments in a happy voice, that it makes the comment less sad or that it makes things better. You know, we really need to have funeral home arrangements on file for your mom because we just need to. I can't even say it in a happy voice, but like saying that when you're just like extra perky doesn't make that less of a hard. I know it's really hard to hear. No, you don't. You don't know it's really hard to hear. You don't know what it feels like, because I bet you've never. Anyway, that was top of mind for me. So I feel very present to use our 619 language, the idea of sitting with each other, because I think that's something that I wish people who get paid to sit with people could do better, because I think that they mess it up a lot, specifically social workers. I think I have a bias against them as an industry right now.
Why do you think, or you know, what are some of the thoughts you have about why that might be? Is some of it too because it's things that they haven't dealt with before, and or just our culture and society of, you know, I need to constantly feel pleasure or hide away from pain, because seeing pain is like only begetting pain in a sense?
I think the story that I tell myself, at least, is that the social workers that I have interacted with and the students that I have worked with in the past who have been in social work are often very young. The students are usually, your typical traditional 18 to 24-year-old student who, at least in the world of dementia diagnoses, probably haven't seen dementia, and if they have, it's probably been with their grandparent, which is different than when it's your parent. It's different than when it's your mom. It's different than when, you know, it's you're the caregiver or not the caregiver type situation. And I don't really know what they teach in social work programs. I don't know if this perkiness that I have experienced from social workers is something that they are taught, and I am missing the point behind the perkiness. But for me, it's a real turnoff to have to fight through somebody else's ability to, or inability to, sit with me in the pain. Actually, now that I talk about it too, maybe they are just in pain themselves, and they're projecting this persona of being happy because they're constantly surrounded by this unhappiness. Like, these social workers have to constantly, day in and day out, be working with these types of people. But so I guess maybe I don't know what the right balance is, but I know that I'm frustrated by, and I get angry at, and I treat rudely. My sister even said, you know, what was up with you and the social worker when we were debriefing afterwards? And I said, I just have an attitude towards them because of how unrealistically it feels like to me they ask these questions and they ask these things of us without really recognizing that what we're going through, I guess. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that fully answers your question, but yeah. What's been your experience working with people who are supposed to be the professionals in the field?
It's been, well, with the miscarriage, I feel by and large fortunate with the people that I came across. And so, you know, when I started to have symptoms and I just knew something was wrong, and it was a Sunday, so I called the nurse hotline, and the nurse I talked to, she was trying to be positive, but I still felt was very like empathetic. I think she was a little like, think positive thoughts, that makes a difference, which started to slightly annoy me because I'm like, if I'm having a miscarriage, I can't think positive thoughts and stop it. Like, that's not how that works. So that was really, kind of it. And I know I don't naturally go to positive a lot of times. I think about the risks and all this stuff. And so that was hard for me. When I went to the ER, I felt like I had a really positive experience. I had since talked to a friend, the one I mentioned, who's had multiple miscarriages, and she's been to that same ER and didn't have a good experience one time. I will say everybody I dealt with for the most part was like professional. They were clear about, this is what we're going to do. This is what it's going to look for. This is how you're going to get the results. They were giving me the information. And I didn't feel like they were being like overly sing-songy. Because when I came in, I mean, I was like completely hysterical. I don't know if I told you about when I went to Coronado has a very small ER. And my doctor had suggested that I go to one of the main Sharp hospitals, but it was rush hour. I was like, time would not be great. So we went to the Coronado one, and there was a lady being seen, and there's only one person checking in. It's a very small waiting room, and a guy in front of me, and I cannot stop hysterically crying. And that gentleman let me go in front of him because he was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "I think I'm having a miscarriage," but I'm sure it was like, blah, 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 blah. And whether he understood or not, let me go in front of him. And the check-in, the individual, he was super like, this is what's going to happen. This is the timeline, because they really only have like one room they could see me in.
Yeah.
For the type of care I would need, they only had one of those specific rooms. So they had to get that ready, blah, blah. And even when I saw the nurse practitioner during that time there, and she came and just like sat down with me and just held my hand and just like let me cry, and gave me time and just said, okay, this is what you need to do. And I think I was fortunate in that aspect of like, I didn't have anybody like, they had asked questions, so they had somewhat of an idea about our infertility and struggles. And of course my OBGYN knew. So when I went to go do the follow-up appointment, she, same thing, was like, held my hand, take your time. I want to make sure that your body's processing everything, so you don't need a follow-up. So I think I was fortunate in that sense of, I think everybody I dealt with, and her nurse, my OB's nurse, who I'd spoken with several times on the phone, had recently suffered a miscarriage. Mm-hmm. So she worked with it a lot, but she also had like been there and was not afraid to share that with me, and just to be like, this sucks. But like, in a sense, like, you can keep going, not in that like, you keep going, everything will be fine, but like, it's tough, but you're not alone. So that was helpful. It was more in the friends and family that wouldn't necessarily know how to handle that, and that's where I felt like people were less helpful in trying to be overly, deal with their own pain and not set the fine. If that answers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting because it's sort of like we're almost looking for solidarity in a way, mm-hmm. where it's not actively seeking out somebody that would say it's going to be okay, or to give to wave the magic wand and say it's going to be fixed, you'll be fine, because we know inherently from whatever experience we're going through that that's just not going to be the case. But somehow when people say this is hard, but you can do it, like, I think that message is more welcomed than the other comments, right? Like trying to put a facade on whatever the truth is. Mm-hmm. But I feel like people so frequently do.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's kind of going back to the social worker, using an inappropriate tone with the words they're saying is that facade, that facade personified because it's not helpful, and it's probably not even making them feel better. It's just going through an act almost.
Right, exactly. And then it's those moments that make me wish that everybody had to take a class like this so that we could learn how to, so that people could learn how to sit through that pain. Because I feel like a lot of, like, I feel frustrated because I am relatively young going through this with my parent, that I can't imagine what it must be like for people who are older than I am, who are going through this and have to deal with the same social worker. Because I feel like the older that I get, the less patience I would have for somebody being so immature almost, given the gravity of the situation. And I'm not saying that I need a social worker to sit there and cry with me, because I want somebody that can help me get things done,
Mm-hmm.
but I also don't need them to sugarcoat or, I mean, I guess the sugarcoat is another, the facade part. I just need them to be real. And that's what just ends up getting missed so much. And it reminds me, this brings to mind something that I went to this session with Tarana Burke a couple of years ago at Cornell, who's the, she was like the Me Too, hashtag Me Too founder. And at the end of her speech, she took Q&A, and I remember this one girl, this one very flaunty white girl, like just was literally and figuratively laying it all out there, asked how she could fix some of the situations with marginalized communities. And she didn't say it quite like that, but whatever question she asked, it was pretty stark like that. And Tarana Burke's response to that was, you leave the marginalized communities alone. You work on your community and let us work on ours. And so I think why this came to mind was because I wonder how many people go into social work to fix others instead of trying to work on whatever they have going on themselves, or, you know, how are they, we all are internalizing things, but then what have they internalized and what are they trying to externalize, and what's missing in the gap there? Because I believe that social work is a really important industry and field and does good work, but I also believe that it can, in my personal and lived experience, hurt more than it helps. And I wonder what the gap is there.
Yeah, I mean, just for my sister going through foster adoption and that whole process, she's had some good social workers and some not as great ones in the 3 years. The one that was the best got burned out. So I think that's what often happens, is a lot of times maybe I don't know if it's all the time, but I know in her experience, the one that was the most helpful to her was just so frustrated at the system itself. So I know there's burnout there, but it is interesting because it's, what the idea of attracting people before they're ready to handle that. And some of it's just having life experiences, but then even just how we think, like developmentally, we're not there. And if it was something that was emphasized to come in like later in your life stages, would that be different? And not that there aren't people that in those life stages, but that are involved. But yeah, I agree. It tends to be younger. That would be interesting to know if that helped or not, or if it's just ingrained in how they're training.
Yeah, I don't know. That's interesting. And I also wonder what does it, because in our I think it's Young that he's quoting in the syllabus, that the people who annoy us the most are the people who tell us about ourselves, or something like that. And so I'm wondering, what am I supposed to be taking away? What is there for me to take away from this annoyance that I have with the social workers? And it's unfair because I've only really interacted with 2 of them, but both of them have demonstrated similar characteristics and come from, seemingly, most likely middle class white backgrounds. And what is that about our I share that background with them. Why are we so annoying? In that regard, at least. But I think I did learn in writing our initial stories that I'm projecting onto them probably a lot of anger and frustration that I have with the whole thing, and maybe they're projecting back to me to protect themselves. I don't know.
Well, no, I've thought about that, because I've thought about why, I know we've talked a little bit before about how it is easier. It has become easier to identify or sit with or have a relationship with people that have gone through something.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some people that I've shared that I have trouble connecting to, and some of it is what they've said in trying to quote unquote help, and some of it is maybe them not having those experiences. But when I get angry about it or just feel like I can't relate to that person, I've also kind of had that thought of, how am I projecting my anger at this situation? And that these two things happened, and they happened within such a short period of time. And yeah, how much of that is me just still processing that anger? And even though I feel like I've gone away from it some, it's like, I love the diagram of the 5 stages of grief, and how it's just connected in multiple ways. And it's like, yeah, but kind of ping pong around. Sometimes it feels like still, I think I'm doing better. And then, anger.
Absolutely. It just like bubbles up out of nowhere sometimes, where you're just kind of like doing something, and then just whatever triggers that, it just can kind of come out of the blue, seemingly, at least. And I guess maybe that's the takeaway for me, is that social workers trigger me. But there's other things too, that trigger anger and frustration. Something that used to really, and probably still does, but I think I talk to college students, like undergraduates, a little less now. But when my students in the past would say things like, I'll just make my mom do X, Y, or Z. I'll just make her send me a suit for the career fair. No, you will not make your mother do anything. You will not make your mother. She will do it because she loves you, and you should value that love and appreciate that love and cherish that love. But you will not make her do a single thing. I used to get really riled up, but I had to keep that all contained in myself, because these were like pretty privileged students most often, a lot of the time. And yeah, I feel like for me, I get angry when people don't appreciate the relationships they have with their mom, because they don't know that it can, before they even know it, be disappearing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. And that for me has also, I think, the uniqueness of our experience, not that like every experience is unique, I guess, and because it's all of our lived experience. I have used my experience to try to isolate myself also from other people who have gone through certain things. And so I think that's something that on the grief, cycle, or the diagram, not necessarily a cycle, but I feel it's so easy to feel isolated, because I can point to all of the ways that other people's experiences are different, that it wasn't their parent, that their parents were divorced, that their diagnosed parent didn't have a partner of some kind, that they weren't the oldest child who was doing the brunt of all of this work, that they didn't, the list can go on and on and on. So it's really easy to choose, but unconsciously choose. So I don't know if that still counts as a choice, to sort of like block in to that isolation.
Yeah. It's just making me think, because it's easy for me to, I like with the nature of, we have to like self quarantine or shelter in right now, and so just it's made it easier for me probably to isolate, or maybe even not that. Like if I think go back to, like, I mean, it was just January, everything happened, but then school started, so it became a lot easier for me to then physically isolate, because I'd be like, oh, I have so much schoolwork I need to do, or this is going on, or even if somebody wanted to do something, I'd be like, oh, Matt, you go. Like, I need a break of not doing school, but I don't feel like going out. And how much of it was that me really doing that to recharge, and how much was that was still like part of the healing, and is still part of the healing process of using that as an excuse to isolate, possibly.
Yeah. One of the things, though, I realized too is that, and I think we touched on this in another conversation also, is the connection that I feel with other people who are experiencing the depth of grief, right? And I think that there's something, you said something earlier about people who have gone through similar things, and I think there's a caveat to that too, that people can have gone through similar things, but if they haven't chosen to reflect and process it, then it's sometimes harder to connect with them, even though, at least in my experience, I feel like we should be able to connect about this, but maybe they're just not, maybe we're just in different places. And so that person finds it a lot more difficult to, like, I think my sister and I experienced that a little bit a long time ago, where with our mom, she was sort of in a, she was really good at sort of separating things and compartmentalizing, and we couldn't cross those compartments that she had made it all to process many things. But now I think that she has sort of grown through that a little bit, and I don't really know what stage she's in necessarily, but I think that she's gotten to a place where she can kind of come across. So I think we have together grown through this process. And I had something else that I wanted to say. I want to like rewind our recording so I can go back and remember where my thought was going.
Well, I tie in something and maybe it'll come to you. Yeah, so I think what I said earlier, I agree. Like, I think it was not the best wording on my part, because it ties into something we talked about earlier of people being willing to go there and reflect. And there's some people, maybe the people that I have connected with over loss, it is easier to connect with them. Maybe even, I mean, part of it could be the loss, but part of it is the sense that they are actually willing to go there. And I feel like less and less people are willing to really go there and deeply reflect. And even on some other things, there were, even going back to previous difficulties when we were dealing with Matt's parents' divorce a couple years ago, like I felt frustration on how other members of the family were processing or not processing things, or knowing that what they chose to communicate and not communicate, and I still see some of that, and I'm part of, like, that's one of one of the difficulties, issues that this family as a whole needs to work on, is our communication. Still,
all family.
Yeah, we're just going to repeat these patterns. Okay. And that's it too, right? Because being willing to go there means, as I'm processing through these difficult things that means that it's going to bring light to things in myself that I'm scared of, or that I still need to work on, or maybe I haven't been aware of yet that I need to be aware of. And I think that ties into grief. It can stunt us, or it can spur us to growth. As I'm becoming aware of these things, like, first off, am I trying to become aware of these things? And then if I am seeking that awareness, seeking that reflection, then what am I doing with that? Am I engaging, or am I, kind of going back to denial and isolation? Like, you might need to isolate sometimes for healing, but are you isolating for healing, or are you isolating yourself from all the feelings that are coming up like permanently?
An interesting question. I had a reaction to that while you were talking, but I was trying to listen so well that I have to figure out where did my thought go. You were saying something right before about isolation.
About the things that come up, like am
Yeah.
I reflecting on the things that come up, or am I?
Sometimes you sit so still that I wonder if your screen has frozen, and then you blink or something, and I'm like, oh, it didn't freeze. But it's like really, it's an incredible skill, Megan. It's really impressive.
It's funny you say that, and that's where I know we can splice this all together. And I wish I hadn't somehow lost that other conversation. I'm still going to check the cloud, because I had a thought at the beginning of this of how we go, like, Melissa and I came together several times to talk about our grief, and we could pull from all of our conversations.
That's true.
So we don't have to like do just this one. Side note. But I was reading, because I was working on my reflection for my individual reflection on our group project, and I was like listening to some of our meeting recordings, and there was one comment that Lauren had made where she's just, it was like a side note, but she said she realizes that when she rewatched like our first meeting, how much she like touches her face and her hair, and she goes, and Stacy and Megan are so still, and I was like, I never really thought about myself sitting still, because I feel like I move my legs and stuff a lot. But so anyway, it's just really funny, like within a span of a couple hours I heard that twice. But you know,
yeah, it's not the whole time, of course, like you're a human. There's just these moments where it's like you just stop. I can't even do it. I'm like wiggling on my chair. But I don't know, it's really impressive, like bodily control, I think. But now I can remember my thought was going, like in my brain, I was at my mom's house, and I wanted to offer something about the stunting and spurring of growth. There was something that came to mind for that.
Do you have that picture of where you were in the house and what you were doing, and maybe talking about that would help trigger?
We were in the basement. It was when we were selling my mom's house. There was something to do, like going through all of the stuff. And just processing all of that, I think. But there was something specific. Anyway, my coffee trick didn't work. I'm trying to keep my brain going. Stunting and spurring us to growth. There was a thought there that I have to think about. Now I'm getting all hot because I'm disappointed that I don't remember it.
Well, hopefully it'll come. So I've been thinking, and I think we talked about this another time, I've been thinking about it a little bit, or continuing to think about it, is the question of, or the statement that grief can stunt or spur us to growth, and can it be a like both and type of thing, or is it one of those things too where because it's not linear and we can come back to, can come back through some of these things as we're going through healing, like it can come back up again. I was wondering, is that in a sense like a stuckness, or is that just again creating another opportunity for growth? And so I think I mentioned this before. So what I mean is, with the miscarriage and then our adoption falling through, and I wrote about it, that I felt that had helped me sit with things a little bit more, with other people. And I feel like seeds of that had been planted a little bit before with my previous divorce. Just some other like times when I was without a job and going through other hard times, like maybe seeds were planted for that, but it was really solidified more in this experience of being really seeking that out and seeing the gift that is, and wanting to be able to also offer that gift to others. But then also sitting with myself, and so tying in with Pima Chodron of being able to just like sit, because I'm normally a take action person, and after the adoption falling through and hearing our options, and I started to take action in a way that I said I wasn't taking action, but starting to take action. I don't know if I've shared this with you. So the agency we work with, we heard about them from another couple, and they did the domestic side of adoption, and they we had talked with them before, but we went a different route. It was really interesting because the wife, I feel like, couldn't conceptualize why we would go a different route, which is kind of a side note. But she, I was like, well, I can have lunch with her and just like talk through it more again, just for knowledge. And then like within 24 hours, I just had this sense of like, I need to not do that, because I'm telling myself, or not even telling myself, I'm feeling this tension between, you need to just sit with this and just be still, and then the tension of I need to take action, I need to always be doing something. And so I ended up canceling the lunch with her, and I just said like, oh, it's like kind of busy, so I should have just been like, I'm not ready for this, but I didn't say that, because I realized even though it was just semi-passive information gathering, it was a sense of me taking action. And so I stopped that, because I feel that need of not taking action on this, because that is my inclination, and just sitting with it. And so when Zachary mentioned recoverable loss, I'm kind of going all over the place, but when Zachary mentioned recoverable loss in our first weekend, even though I'd read those words, it hit me in a new way of like, maybe that is why I'm feeling this stronger urge to sit and with something, and then also what have I missed on in my personal spiritual, cognitive, human development in the past by not sitting with things, and maybe then I wasn't ready to, I don't know. So that I feel like is an area of growth for me, and not that I've achieved it, but like I'm continually working on that. But then also the quarantine, which, shelter in place, which was gonna last for at least a couple months probably, has added that extra layer of if I came to a point where I felt that I had sat with it and that I felt a clear direction of where to go, or even just exploring, I can't. And either way, really, I mean, the adoption agency, potentially we could sign new paperwork, but like we have to redo our medical exam because it's a different type, and we have to redo all these other things that require going places that I can't physically go to right now. And the same with fertility specialists, that's not considered essential. And so, medical needs. And so I've been kind of going, okay, am I also stunted in a way? Because even if I'm ready to move forward, I physically can't. And is it just bringing up the grief process in a new way? I don't know if it's like being stunted or tied to growth, or if it's just an awareness. Does that make sense?
It does. I have a few follow-up things, but I want to, on a personal note, I feel similarly. I didn't realize until just listening to you, we've talked about these things a few times now, that I feel stunted in some ways with my own grief growth because my mom is still here. Mm-hmm. That sometimes I metaphysically think that I'm ready to grow through her death. I can't, because I don't know what that's going to be like. I think about it all the time. Like, that's one of the things that kind of creeps up out of the blue somewhere. And sometimes it's like, what is that going to be when I get these phone calls from her nursing home? Is this going to be the call? And I get a voicemail from them. I look for the words in the transcription that says non-urgent, because and there was one time where they didn't say that. The social worker, by the way, left this whole voicemail and never said anywhere. And they are so consistent about this is a non-emergency call. Like, so don't freak out by hearing from us, basically. And she didn't say that. And I was like, I forget what the situation was that I felt like there was reason to be concerned. But anyway, I feel like I can't move through that part of the process because it just hasn't happened yet. And so kind of like you're feeling contained by the quarantine, I'm feeling contained in a way by my mother's life, which is a really strange way to think about it. And I think that there's a chance that only people who have been in situations with having a parent on like just the brink of not being a fully functioning human being really, you know, I knew a therapist once whose parent had a stroke. And so she got it. Like we could talk about what it was like to love your parents so much, and you don't want to wish for their death, but then at the same time, when does a life stop being a life? And you can get into all the, you know, metaphysical stuff or existential things, I guess, about that. But I had a couple of questions for you based on what you said. And the first, I mean, in no particular order, I guess, but one of them was, can you talk about how you feel about the action of sitting? And does it count as action?
Yeah. It's easier than it used to be. And so that's where I feel a sense of growth. And initially, the longer I do it, I don't know if easier is the right word, but the more I'm at home with it. And I'm finding some contentment in that. And I think, like, initially, you know, by going ahead and setting up that lunch, I was trying to take action, but something within me, and I think it was part of, you know, as we're, I was just reading, I'm going to butcher his name, Asa Gioli. And so I was talking about like the authentic center. So maybe the authentic center in me was like, you need to not do this. Because as some people were offering things, my mom was throwing out some kind of really interesting ways of people she knows to try to grow their family. And I realized, like, I'm still grieving this, and I'm not in a place where I'm ready. I'm kind of circular answering your question. I promise I'll get there. But like rushing into something else is not going to take away the pain of what's happened. It's going to keep me from dealing with it. And I think I had this. I keep going to seeds. I think I had the seeds of that though from when I went through my divorce, and I had moved to the DC area to be closer to some friends. And I started dating before I was ready, and it was just a mess. And I wasn't ready. And I had a friend later say, well, I didn't think you were ready. And part of me was like, why didn't you say something? But it also was my work, not theirs. You know, I wish they had said something, but again, it's my work to be done. But I ended up really hurting that person. I feel like because they just didn't understand. Like, I thought things were going well, and why are you struggling? And I don't understand. And so I think that planted the seeds of like trying too early. So then after that, I just didn't date for a while. But I think that planted the seeds of like rushing into things too soon is obviously, like, I know a lot of people would say that, but like you have to experience some things. And I had even been apart from my ex-husband for a while when I had started dating. So it wasn't like I was immediate, but I think that kind of set the seed. So when I started hearing other people like giving suggestions, like I would almost feel anger from that of like, I am still grieving, and you're trying, again, it goes back to the not sitting. And so you're trying to come up with this, you're trying to fix instead of just being. So initially I was feeling pulled towards it, but also kind of fighting it. But the more I am sitting with it, the more that I feel like like things that I cognitively told myself, like I'm more embodying, like that. I've always said like motherhood is not like the soul defining thing. And not that it's not great and wonderful and beautiful, but like at some point your children will probably leave the house. And if that's your only identity, like, what does that mean? You know, it's just like, it's just and how we still tie like female identity to motherhood. And so if I end up not being a mother, like what does that mean? And so even though I cognitively had like agree with that they're not the same thing, and that, you know, whether you're a mother or not, that I'm not explaining this very well, but that like I felt like I'm more, I don't know, at peace. At peace keeps coming to mind, but like at peace with like I'm starting to more embody what I've thought and said, and realizing how much that there's times where I was listening more to voices that I don't really agree with. So I don't know if that's really answering your question.
It does, and I have a follow-up. You are bouncing between, and this is a good thing, I think. You're comparing a past self to your current self. And your past self is the one that was going through your divorce, and your current self is the one who's processing miscarriage and adoption. Can you talk a little bit about what did sitting with your feelings feel like with your past self when maybe you weren't sitting with them? And I'm going to encourage you to go internal for that, right? To tell us a little bit about your tell me about that. And then on the flip side, how has that changed as you're sitting with, like, what differences do you notice between how you're allowing the feeling of sitting with to be with you compared to then and now, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Well, and I think how I interpreted sitting with something, I still, like, looking back, feel like it's not the same. Like I was more like maybe we're in the same room when I was going through my divorce. Maybe we're in the same room or even on the same couch in a sense, but like very separated. Because even when I stopped seeing someone, excuse me, I had started doing some counseling, and I think that would have helped if I continued longer. But I think I should have found a different therapist. My therapist kept wanting to take everything back and blame basically my parents. And I found that to not be helpful with dealing with where I am now. And not that there can't be roots of things there, but I feel like overall I grew up in a loved and supported home. And I know there are some impacts of that, but instead of finding a different therapist or exploring another therapist, I just stopped going. And that's when I was fully avoiding, like sitting with was, I wouldn't even say in the other room. Sitting with was like outside my apartment. I was like not gonna go there. So that's when I started. I was like, well, maybe I just need to like just start like being out more and dating. And then I realized I wasn't ready for that. So sitting with like came inside the house and was maybe in the same room and maybe even on the same couch, but I wasn't fully engaging with sitting with. I was still avoiding in different ways. In the sense of, like for me, instead of taking this as an opportunity to like explore my faith, I'm thinking of like Fowler stages and really getting into stage 4 and 5 where you're like questioning in a way of strengthening and really understanding what you believe. I was like hiding from my faith. and really kind of not willing to go there in a lot of ways. And so I think it wasn't until I moved. I was working remotely, so my job required me to move back out to California. Because I physically was distancing myself from people that were maybe enabling me and not dealing with things. And again, it was my work, it's not theirs. But then I began to sit with more and process a little bit more. But I still feel like it was on a different level. And it makes me think of something that you said in a previous conversation of how when we look back, we go, okay, I didn't just make these decisions with the knowledge that I had then, but also who I was then. And I think looking back, it's possible.
That's what I was trying to say earlier. That was a thought. You remembered it for me.
Yeah, but that was possible with my divorce, is that I think it's potentially I was moving, we started to have difficulties. I was trying to move to a different stage, and my ex-husband wasn't ready for that, or not understanding what that was, and I wasn't probably fully understanding what that was. But then going back to the present, well, actually, let me go back. And I think because I kept sitting with at a distance because I was scared of really going there on myself, and going, okay, I think I was scared of looking inside and seeing nothing of value. And so I was a little more self-destructive. Not like I wasn't doing drugs or anything like that, but I was definitely drinking too much. And having, again, some of the friendships I had, it's not that they're horrible people, but they were not conducive to my overall like emotional and mental health in some ways. And I think I wasn't necessarily for them either, because I couldn't, or I was struggling to be that for them. So I think that was, again, part of the avoidance of that. And I think with now, I feel like sitting with is kind of like on my lap. Like almost like a little kid on my lap, or like even like my dog like can hop up on the chair and we kind of like snuggle. And it's not that it's always comfortable, right? Like I know you've seen Maddie through the cameras, but she's a Basset Beagle. She's 55 pounds, so she's not tall, but she is compact, and she can be kind of heavy. Sometimes her elbow kind of gets into a certain spot, and so it's a little uncomfortable, but it's good at the same time. Mm-hmm. So I feel like that's where sitting with, and I am now over the past couple of months, like it's less of the elbow sticking in, but if it is, it's because we're getting closer. And I'm, learning more about myself, and I mean, I think becoming more of who I want to be, or who I am, but I haven't realized yet.
I love the sitting with metaphor that you're using. And I think that, as an aside, let's go back to what we were talking about yesterday. I think you're at a higher stage than you might give yourself credit for being able to talk about sitting with and yourself in the way that you do. Just 2 cents from over here. But I have another question for you.
Okay.
Well, or I can tell you. Okay. Just one more, and then I can tell you also about the thing that restruck me when you were talking. That was it, everything makes so much sense. But anyway, something that came to mind a while back when you were talking about all of this life experience. I think, again, when you were comparing your divorce and the miscarriage, so kind of then and now, between these two pain points that we're kind of focusing on, it made me wonder, because you were saying that you weren't ready for it back then, like to sit with that, you wherever you were developmentally, or just in your brain, which I guess would be developmentally, but what because I'm just curious. I don't know the story of Job very well, but I'm interested or curious what your thoughts are as far as like getting, because he was just tested over and over and over again, right? Mm-hmm. For how much does he how does he hold on to things and hold on to God? I don't know if you have thought about your relation to that story at all, and and how it relates to your story, and if you see any parallels or connection there, or if it's just kind of a I don't know.
I don't feel like I'm dealing with it the same way Job does. But, and then I know, I mean, side note, I know some people take Job as literal, and then some people take it as, like scholars, take it as like a metaphor for teaching. But I don't know why I said that, but information I don't know. So, it's the thing when your boss is a biblical scholar, so you learn all sorts of things. It's interesting because from the I'll just share like the because there's a few other things that happen in between. So without getting too much into them. So the job that I had, I was able to move to DC from Florida when Dave and I separated. Because I worked remote. So I didn't have to get a new job. And he was about to go on a ship anyways. And I was like, I don't want to be in Jacksonville, Florida. So basically by myself. And my relationship with my parents wasn't good because how they were taking the divorce as their failures as parents, despite my assertion that that was not the case. So anyway, the company was growing, and then I could move to I could move to California or Arizona, and because that was where the two offices were. So I had lived in San Diego for years. I said San Diego, had some people I still knew there, and like looking back, I see how it served a purpose in getting me to a place where, like I was able to reconnect with aspects of myself I've been running away from, and sort of starting to sit with things, like reconnecting with my faith in a new way, having healthier relationships of all sorts. But then that job itself, there were some destructive aspects of that. And so then after Matt and I, even before we got married, we had talked about leaving that job at some point for him to go out on his own. I was starting to feel more about going to the nonprofit side. And so when we did leave that job, it was a year or two after we've been married, soon enough. But I mean, it was financially difficult because Matt was starting a company, so you have some startup costs, even if you're trying to keep your overhead really low, like the fees you have to pay for that, and getting a lot of other things in place. And then it was difficult for me to find work. So I didn't have a job for 8 months, which was really hard. I had a couple part-time things I scrabbled together, which still does not equal a full-time job. And so that was difficult. So that felt like another trial. And then, as infertility increased, time, of course, like we'd already been experiencing infertility. So after a year, we'd seen a doctor and found out like, Matt's fine. I don't ovulate every cycle. So I have even less of a chance. Like I only ovulate maybe a couple times a year. So I have less chances to get pregnant. And there was a few other things on my side. So we tried some things that didn't work. So all of that had been going on, over a couple of years when we started the adoption process, which was moving forward, but slower because financially, I feel like we'd move forward on something and have like a hit. So I don't feel like I've had as many major catastrophes as Joe, but I have felt like there's definitely been times where I've like, why like another thing? And I know, again, cognitively, I know not everybody's life is perfect, but I look like some people, there's some people related to by marriage or whatever that I just go, why have we had within a span of 5 years, like so many things happen that we've had to deal with, and life just seems really like they haven't had any of these major, not that I'm wishing something bad to happen, but it's just like, why have we experienced job loss, like major financial struggles, infertility, you know, like there's been a couple months where we were just like, how are we going to pay the bills? Like, no idea. The miscarriage, then the adoption falling through. So I will say I'm definitely in the sense of like maybe more like there's times in the Psalms, and I don't remember which ones, but that David is definitely like calling out to God. And I've definitely screamed like obscenities. I'm like, what the F? I don't understand. And I'm sure my parents would be appalled. But I think too, that's part of like, if God and I are going to have an authentic relationship, I need to be like, this is really what I'm feeling. But then knowing too that like I feel like because we've gone through some of these things, and it's not that it doesn't take effort, right? Like, so like grief as stunting or growth, like the growth requires effort. And so I do feel like that has helped Matt and I become stronger because we've walked through these things together. And so I feel like our marriage has this intimacy that I didn't have in my first one. And again, not that we couldn't have gotten there, but because you know, whatever, I'm not going to go there. But like we do have this intimacy that I find really that I would hate to not have. And so it's kind of like you can't like if I like who I'm becoming, then I have to also be grateful for the experiences that have helped shape me, even if they have really sucked.
Okay, Wilbur.
I know, right? So, you know, like, right, it's like our growing ability to sit with things and with people. I mean, I don't think people just naturally get there. I mean, maybe. I think some people have a natural inclination to empathy. Maybe more than others, but
that actually is a great segue into the thing that I was trying to remember earlier, because I think that where my mind went was I was describing selling my mom's house, and to do that we had to go through everything. And our approach at the time was we were living in Pennsylvania. She was in upstate New York. It was like a 6-hour drive to go back and forth. And it was a lot, you know, it required a lot of us. And in the midst of everything else that was also going on, right? Like we were trying to get married. We were trying to understand my mom's diagnosis and what it meant of us and what it meant for her. I think we were in like this huge denial stage, like just very strongly, just kind of saying like, okay, but we won't have to deal with the actual Alzheimer's part until like years and years from now, right? Like we were still wrapping our minds around what all this meant. And so I go back to these moments of looking through these things, and we were like, we were so like flattened by this experience at that point already. And it was even, you know, this was like the first year and a half. And we could only make the decisions that we could at the time, right? And I mean, there's things that now my sister and I talk about. We're like, oh yeah, where is that? It got thrown out. It got missed. You know, when we moved across the country, I have this box full of photos, and I worked so diligently to scan them all in. And I probably could have stored the box of photos at my in-laws' house. They would have been more than happy to store it. But we threw it out. And I sometimes wonder if I need to regret like throwing away this box of photos. Did I scan all of the right ones? Did I get them? You know, if we ever go back to look at them, because I didn't scan them all because, you know, my sister loved to take pictures of like whales in the water. And, you know, like back when it was not like you couldn't see the photo that you were taking. Anyway, side note. So my main point is just that when I look back at my experience with caring for my mom and doing all these things, I have to give myself a lot of grace for only knowing what I knew at that time. And I can't look at it in hindsight saying like could have done these 17 things differently, because I didn't know then what I know now. And that is sometimes a really tough tension to stayed balanced with, because it's so easy to look back and ask myself, why didn't I, or why did I? And I could probably drive myself crazy if I lived in that world, but instead I try really, really, really hard. And it's like you said, it's work to grow. You can't do it otherwise, really. Nobody's going to do it for you. You can lead the horse to water, but you can't make a drink, as the saying goes, right? But I try really, really hard to remind myself, and whenever I feel myself like kind of leaning into these what ifs or why didn't I and all that, those types of questions, I try to pull myself back and remember that, you know, I was going through whatever whoever I was at the time. But it's really difficult to maintain that balance of grief. But I think that you're totally right that it takes work.
I had a couple thoughts, but I don't want to cut you off your story. So we've talked previously about, I mean, because it ties with being able to sit with people, but Keegan talks about the need or the importance of recognizing the stage that people are at, you know, so we can support them and understand them, but how much that is what we're talking about, and recognizing that, including ourselves. Like Keegan was kind of talking as a psychotherapist or something, like recognizing that. But when we're looking back at past selves, that's what showing grace is recognizing, like we've been saying, like this is where I was and I was at this stage. So I was thinking about that. Do you think the giving ourselves grace, do you think that, I'm asking, do you think that is related at all to acceptance in the stages of grief?
Yeah. I think it has to be, because I think acceptance is acceptance of a lot of things, right? I think I think if you just look or think about the grief model as a framework, it feels linear. But when you look at it with the picture that we have of everything is just kind of going in and out, to me, acceptance kind of eventually encapsulates everything else. I feel like I will at some point live the rest of my life with acceptance being the vehicle that's carrying the anger and the isolation and the bargaining, because I think that those things aren't going to go away. I think that there will be moments like on my graduation day from this program that I will be angry that I can't share it with my mom. When I'm writing the acknowledgments in my dissertation, like she's a large like she's the reason why I'm alive, you know, like there's a lot of debt to, that I not owe her, but that she credited me with, right? Like she credited me with life. And so that's something that, and based on the relationship that we had and all those things, like even with all the ups and downs and alcoholism and stuff like that, like there's goodness there. But I think that acceptance will be it's I think deeper than just acceptance of the cause of the grief, right? It's acceptance of this person is no longer here in the way that I want them to be. And I am no longer the person that I was when they were. I think that it's at least a two-part. Maybe there's more to be learned as we go through this process, or as I go through mine with this. But I think that it is an acceptance of, I can never not be Melissa, a daughter who's also a caretaker or a caregiver, right? Like that's always going to be a part of my identity now. But I can go back to and remember and celebrate the Melissa who was just a daughter before she became a caregiver. But me today at present and all the future presents, they're inseparable. So I guess I kind of have to accept and embrace that in order to become whatever I become, I guess. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting question to think about. What do you think?
Yeah, that's as you were talking, I was thinking that's the acceptance isn't just of what's happened, but of who you are, how you're handling it, because it can be so easy to beat yourself up And I've tried to become very proficient with that, and I appreciate Matt because he calls me out on it when I'm doing that, and points out the futility of if I'm not using it to grow. Like if I'm not using it to see how I can grow, or if I need to, it's not helpful. And so I think it's grace and how we handle things, and then and then grace and who we are now, and so accepting and who we become and will continue to become, because it's these things that have happened and are like still happening, right? Like yours is still happening. Like we're still being influenced by it, so it's not like it's ever going away, as you were just saying. And so it can continue and will continue to affect us and mold us and shape us. There was something you said, you were talking about things in parts, and I'd written down something earlier when you were talking about, so maybe this is a both and, not an either or question, but even though grief is not linear, are you in a sense, or will you be, do you think, processing your mom's illness and then eventually her death as part of the same grief process? Or do you think it would be kind of in parts, or different, like a new grief process that would start?
It's a really good question. A couple of years ago, actually, Steve, I think my sister was coming to visit or had just left after a visit. And Steve made the observation that she and I are in a really difficult position because we will never have the chance to grieve the mother that we had, like in a linear fashion, at least, where, because right now she's still here, but we do grieve who she used to be. We still have her. We still talk about her in the present tense, which is different than other people who have actually lost a parent, for example. So we have something that those people don't, but those people, in my mind, at least in the story that I tell myself about those other people that have lost a parent, didn't have to go through the agonizing process of watching their parent lose literal and figurative functionality, right? Like tangible and intangible. And so, yeah, I think that there's a part of me that at moments when I had a former colleague who I found out from another former colleague had cancer. And I really adored this colleague. She was, the sweetest person. And so I went to the drugstore to get a card just to send to her and say, like, thinking of you and well wishes and stuff like that. Random, like Tuesday afternoon or something like that. And I'm in this card section and I find the card. I love getting cards. Greeting cards were one of the first things that I started buying for myself when I was a kid with like my allowance and stuff like that. I don't know how much my mom subsidized it or didn't subsidize it, but that she just knew that I loved giving and receiving cards and whatever. So I enjoy looking for them. And I found one that I liked, and then I turned to leave. And, the birthday cards caught my eye, nowhere near my birthday month at all. But I saw all of like this row of cards that were like, to my daughter on your birthday. And I just was standing there and like almost was bawling in the middle of a CVS because I'll never get one of those cards again from my mom, who is also really good at giving cards. So, like those things hit me in weird ways, and kind of just come up out of the blue. And now even remembering back to that moment, I just kind of felt so small. But then I also think that, yeah, there's a different part that as we get farther away from the current her, the dementia mom, there will be grief in that process too, because did we visit enough? Did we do the right things? Did we send what we could? Did we do enough to remind her of who she is and you know, in the moments that she has clarity.
Mm-hmm.
It's really difficult to know. And the really hard thing about dementia too, and the really hard part, one of the hard parts about grieving someone with dementia, in my experience at least, and something my sister and I talk about, is that dementia looks different for everyone. And so there's really no way to tell when she's going to have a good day, when she's going to have a bad day, when she's going to have a moment of clarity or when she's not. And not that there's not other complications with other diseases and other things, but with dementia, it's just really, like, I compare it to cancer, which can also be fairly or unfairly, can also be a elongated or prolonged course, right? But oftentimes those people, I think, at least have their voice still. They can communicate. They can have coherent thoughts, even if they're in a lot of pain. And my mom can't do those things. So but maybe that's another way that we isolate ourselves. Now that I think about it, so maybe that's another way that the grief process comes in at these weird moments to kind of say, like, this is that's insulating us into our experience. So maybe to your question, maybe we're further along in processing the grief for the mom who raised us. We kind of talk about it as in the mom who raised us and the mom we have now, like the dementia mom. So maybe we're further along in the process of grieving the mom who raised us versus the woman who is our mother now who has dementia. I don't know.
And it's one of those things too where until it happens, like, you don't know, right? It's like so many things, like, you say in your head, like, okay, if this happened to me, this is how I think I would handle this, but you don't know until it actually happens.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
so. I had one other thought when you were talking about, maybe you could speak to it more, but that you said, like, things felt flattened, like the world felt flattened. And so that made me think of Washburn, in the sense of, so he talks about regression. He's talking about the regression of ego in the service of transcendence. So, like, reconnecting to like just the natural spirit power in the world, whatever that is, you know, being as vague as possible, I guess. But and he kind of speaks to it as a one-time thing, and that's where I kind of feel like we can, I feel like we can, there's more opportunity out there to regress or fall back to, like, look out. But anyway, like, it could happen multiple times, my personal, you know, thinking. But anyway, the reason I bring up Washburn is he talks about when this starts to happen, when we're preparing for this regression for transcendence, like, the world starts to seem more flattened. And it's one of those phrases he repeats several times. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that, and what you see as your ways in which you maybe have grown or even experienced aspects or moments of transcendence since then, or yeah.
What a question. Let me think. I felt like in that particular instance that I was talking about, with when we were in the process of selling my mom's house, it just felt like the whole world was flat. Like, when I look back on it, it feels very, like, two-dimensional, like I'm in a Nintendo game or something, because it just kind of felt like we were running along, and we got this like, you have this mission, your mom has dementia, figure it out. And okay, I'm running through like a little Mario or Luigi. I was always Luigi, so maybe I'm more Luigi-like. And you come across these obstacles, and it's kind of like one at a time, where it's like, okay, who's going to take care of your mom? Figure that out, research who's available to, like, what programs are out there to support. So you go to the Alzheimer's Association. Less helpful than you might imagine, though everybody thinks that it's so helpful, but was less helpful to me. Maybe I was using it wrong, I don't know. And then, okay, so how do we get to the point where we decide to sell the house? Okay, how do you sell a house? And we bring a realtor in, and we deal with power of attorney paperwork, and we deal with healthcare proxy paperwork, and we deal with, so it's just kind of like all of these things just kind of, but it comes up in a very linear fashion, where it's just like one thing. So did you ever play Nintendo, like Mario, Luigi, the old one?
Not very much, because my parents were very much into like Socrates, the learning video game. So, but I played it a couple of times at somebody else's house. I have some basic knowledge, yeah.
Knowledge. So it's just like, it's all very, like, he can really only come across one thing at a time, unless it's those like turtle things, at least in the lower levels, which is really all I got up to. Like, I didn't even realize there was any world past level 4 until I married Steve, and he could get so much farther. Yeah. And then there's all sorts of crazy stuff that comes up. So just really thinking on my experience with Mario. And it just, anyway, that's what it felt like. I think I'm just really doubling down on this Nintendo video game kind of metaphor for it. But I think that's true to form in a way, because it just kind of, everything felt very one thing, two thing. And then sometimes it would pile on, but then sometimes it felt like we had done everything we needed to do, and we could just run for a little bit and just have a breath. But then you get the two turtles that are like coming back and forth and want to kill you, right, like as fast as possible. And so then you're just jumping up all over again. So I think that was the flattening that I felt, and the selling her house is just kind of like the big, is a big milestone of the experience for me, because it was insane. Like, you know what it was? My sister, my mom was a something, what do they call it on bank accounts? Like
a co-signer?
Co-signer. She didn't co-sign anything, but was like a co-account person.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, joint account owner, yeah.
Joint account owner, yes. With my sister, and that was preventing my sister from being able to do something. I forget what, like I think she wanted to close her bank account so she could do something more local to where she was, but she couldn't do it unless my mom also came along. And so because I had power of attorney, we were trying to get my mom off the account so that my sister could do what she wanted with her account without having to get my mom involved, because, you know, by this point my mom was in an assisted living facility. Anyway, they wouldn't let my sister, they wouldn't let us, me acting as power of attorney, let my sister get my mom off the account. And I thought that was just ridiculous, because I have sold an entire house with the power of attorney, like the same power of attorney paperwork. And so that was really quite frustrating. That was a side note for some reason.
Well,
but
complete side note, like separate conversation, I could talk about my frustration with how they handle joint account owners anyway. So I like resonate, and I'm not surprised by any of that from what I've seen from working in finance and going through divorce and all that aspect.
It's insane. Yeah. I was surprised at how like tightly held they were to that. But as far as moments of transcendence go,
growth and transcendence seems to like out there.
Growth and transcendence. I think that there have been moments. I don't know what they are right now at the moment.
And maybe that's not the point to know, right? Because even as I was trying to name my own growth, like, because things aren't linear, like maybe it's happening and we're not even like, because it's still happening and we're still growing, we can't name it.
Can't know it. The one thing that does come to mind though is Even though my mom was an alcoholic and that colored our childhood and in ways that we didn't really realize at the time, but I have only realized looking back, my sister and I are both really certain that we had a good childhood and our mom loved us, and we had a good relationship with her, like overarchingly. Of course, we were human, and so it wasn't perfect or anything like that. So there was fights and arguments and misunderstandings and stuff. But I have this vision of my mom, because she sacrificed a lot to give us the life that we had, right? Both of my parents are from the Midwest, and they moved to New York together, and then they got divorced, and my dad left and went to Maryland, and my mom stayed in New York by herself. She had zero community in New York, especially after they got divorced. Kind of like you're saying, you know, your community just dissipates, right? Because people, for whatever reason, right, like maybe they can't sit with that, it makes them too uncomfortable to deal with whatever you're going through. And I think that my mom found that to be very true. And I went to, as a sidebar, my great aunt's funeral with my mom, after she, I don't remember where it fell in the line of being diagnosed anyway, but some ancient family member of hers, second, third cousin, twice removed or whatever, a bitch, I'll say, asked my mom why she never moved back to Michigan after my parents got divorced. And just the way she asked the question and the timing of when she asked the question, it was all very emotional. Made my mom feel really bad. Like the woman was intentionally trying to make my mom feel guilty about why she never came back to Michigan to be with her family, who she was never very close to. And frankly, Michigan is like one of the shittiest states in the country. And so why would she go back? But hearing that and debriefing with my sister, and we've talked about it every now and again throughout the years, we realized the depth of my mom's sacrifice for staying in New York, especially after she got divorced from my dad, and my mom never remarried and had on again, off again relationships with people, but never, you know, anything really solid. But she dedicated her life to providing us a good childhood and providing us, she gave us a lot of love, right? Like we were her world. And I think in a way, Megan and I feel, I want to say guilty, but I don't think that's the right word. Feel some type of responsibility that we are the reason why once we went to college, she just kind of like totally lost herself in alcohol, because her whole point of living was going away. And this is kind of speaking to something that you brought up earlier about how even when you are a mother, your kids do grow up and you need to have a sense of yourself that's not your child. And I think my mom didn't have that necessarily, for better or worse. So anyway, all of that background to say that the vision that I have of my mom is that she is kind of like this phoenix, the mythical phoenix bird that like lives so brightly and so strongly that it dies, but then it's reborn through its ashes. And so I kind of feel like my sister and I are reborn in my mother's ashes. And even as painful as it is, like we couldn't be us and who we are today if she hadn't been who she was, and we had these ashes that we have to grow from. So maybe one of the moments of growth and anything like that is just really recognizing how important and how powerful love can be, and just really living that out very loudly in different ways, and just being open to ways to embrace that. And it kind of brings to mind that Maya Angelou quote, for better or worse, about people won't remember what you said or what you did, but they'll remember how you made them feel. I guess maybe living that has been a big takeaway from all this with my mom.
That was really good. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's all I can say. Words will not do it justice. Yeah.
I don't know. How are we doing? Okay. I have another question for you. I don't know how to ask it, but I'll see what happens. given all of the experiences that you've had and the learning that you've had from your experience and these different moments, painful and otherwise joyful too, because there's been joy throughout, you know, what does the future, like in your imagination, what does the future look like for you, the best future, or what are the possibilities that are out there?
Yeah, I don't know. Getting my PhD. Once I figure out my dissertation topic. You know, it is interesting because you know, Matt and I have talked about this at length, and I've always kind of had this, not always, but kind of, I said always and kind of way too many times, so I'm just going to say it, had this, like, I'm moving forward to something, and I think that's too why, also why I'm becoming closer with sitting with is Matt calling that out. Like, he's not afraid to name things that I'm hiding from, which I greatly appreciate. You know, I joke, one of my friends from college who went to the same college as my ex-husband, but we're actually from the same hometown, went to different high schools, we didn't know each other. But we've remained friends. So he's one of the few that, like, we stay close. I stay close to. He's met Matt, but he lives across country. But when Matt and I first started dating, and I was telling him about Matt, and I was very like, how is he going to take this? Is he going to, you know? And he wasn't. I joke, he's like the brother I never had. But he had said, like, when Matt and I started dating, well, like, does he call you out on your shit? And I was like, yes, he actually does. And he's like, good. And he said it in a joking way, but I think it's a complete sidebar, but it just made me think of that. I'm going to share that story because it's, like, true. Like, you need, in a loving way. You don't need people just telling you your crap all the time, but in a loving way. And now I lost my train of thought. So I'm going to cut out this little part of the video. These experiences. It's been joy. Can you say the question one more time? Sorry.
Basically, just what, you know, as you're processing all of these things that you've been through, and the grief and things, and maybe there isn't like an answer right now. Maybe the answer is just like surviving. But if you could imagine all the different directions your life could go from this moment, is there one that you are excited for, or what are the possible directions that life could go?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Sorry, I took myself on my own tangent and got lost.
That's okay. Happens to me all the time.
I know. And I'm not going to lose it this time, but sidebar, I also love cards, and I hate that I don't have, like, I didn't have a good card for Matt for his birthday, because I'm like, the card stores are essential. If you haven't been to Seaside Papery in Coronado, it's one of my favorite card stores, and we'll have to go when this is all over.
Yeah.
Like, love that place. But anyway, the possibility, I mean, like, if I'm thinking very narrowly about what's happened, you know, I think we can, there is still a possibility that I could get pregnant. I could, I never put the goalie back in, you know, I haven't gone back on birth control. As people say, put the goalie in. You know, but if I get pregnant, like, I could lose the child again, or I could have a successful pregnancy. We could also look at other types of adoptions. We could look at international adoptions again, but part of why our agency decided not to renew is international adoptions have changed a lot, and they're changing more rapidly. And part of that is some of it is countries are better able to prepare or to take care of their the children that are there. And there are, in different countries, political changes that can affect that. So that's where, I don't know, we could go that route. We could go to domestic, which it's just the idea of somebody picking you, and are you like, it almost ties in that feeling of good enough, which is hard. I think it's hard for me. Who knows? We could look at foster adoption, but walking through that process with my sister, and she's had, even the caseworker she's had have said like hers is unusually difficult and long, but I don't know if I am called to do that, or we're called to do that. So I still don't feel like I'm running away from it. I don't feel called to do that, because we still have a niece that could still be taken away, because of how protracted that process has been. So I think trying to go through that twice in the same like larger family would be difficult for all of us. So that's that specifically, and two, it could be any of those. We could start down, or we could still see a fertility specialist and explore a few other options. I personally still would rather go through adoption than IVF. It's paying that much money for a 20% chance. I'm not faulting people that do that. I have friends that have done that, but it's just, I would rather try to make a home for a child that's already there or is going to be born and needs a home. So, I mean, Matt feels the same way. We've talked about it, and feels the same way. So, but, so those are for like parenthood, but that could also happen in the next couple of years. At some point my body is going to make certain options obsolete. And I've always said, like, I don't want to be having kids in my like mid 40s, but at the same time, like, and that's on the specific of what's happened recently. But when I look at like the larger future, and I think I may have mentioned this in our last call, and I was actually talking with Craig, who had reached out to me. So after the last weekend, about what I had shared in class. And, I was like, this, even though I've known I'm not in control, this year has been a year of really reminding Megan that she's not in control. Because there's, it's like with the miscarriage, multiple medical professionals, and I don't think they were just saying what I wanted to hear, were like, because they still don't always understand why miscarriages happen. It's like, there's nothing you could have done. Like, I didn't know I was pregnant for so long. So I'm like, did I drink too much coffee? Because I was drinking a lot of coffee. It was finals. It was Christmas. I was drinking way too much coffee. And they're like, no. Like, there's nothing you could have done. Like, I had no control over that situation. And even the adoption, like, I had no control over that, that happening. And then when I was in Argentina for school, and Matt having, like, right before I leave, we find out like one of our dogs has this congenital kidney thing we didn't know about, and we end up having to put her down. And at first I was like, am I not crying as much as I think I would have in the past? Because I was worried my heart was becoming numb. I'm again, circular answering your question. My heart was becoming numb. But part of me thinks too, is it more, I was sad, but after going through these other things, because I've lost animals before, like, it was more of an acceptance that this is what it was. And she had a horrible life before she came to us. Like, we don't know all the details, but she had a good 3 years where she was loved and taken care of. And just maybe in that situation, I moved more into acceptance because of these other heavier things that had happened. I don't know. But if I think future, it ties in with control. Like, I don't know. And I'm less scared about that than I have been in the past, because, how I ended up in this program, and I think I want to teach afterwards, but I'm also open to like, there are things out there. Derek, I don't remember his last name. I think he just defended, or maybe he defended last year. Anyways, he was part of the newly admitted student stuff, and I'd emailed with him before when I got accepted. But he said, I remember him saying, there are opportunities out there that you don't know about, and you won't know until you are in the program and you get further in, and like there will be opportunities that you can't name. And I love that, because I'm like, I have this idea of like, I think I want to teach, but I'm like open to what may come. I'm more open to what may come than Megan of 5 years ago. I would even say like a year ago, because I want to control everything and I want to have a plan. And it's not that I still don't like to be organized and have somewhat of a plan, but I am embracing more of, by trying to have such that tight control, that I'm then limiting myself. Like, I've limited myself on like, what experiences have I missed out on because I was so focused on the plan and like, this is what we're going to do, and this is how things are going to go. And it makes me think of, so years ago I went to Ireland with a friend of mine, and she found this great deal, and financially I probably should have waited, but a friend of mine from DC had died unexpectedly. Like, random tree bough fell on his head, like very random, as he's walking. And it was just complete shock. And he loved James Joyce and always wanted to go to Ireland. And I wanted to go to Ireland too, but like, always wanted to go to Ireland. And like, at one point we had even talked about like going with a group of people. And so Heather, a few months after he died, Heather found this deal, let me know about it. And I knew and I know without a doubt, because like, not that I wouldn't have said yes regardless, but I said yes so quickly, of like, I will figure out how to make this work financially to go. But like, we had a plan of what we were going to do, but like, I remember we made this detour. She wanted to get some traditional Irish food, blah, blah, blah. And we had this plan of we were going to drive afterwards. And it wasn't anywhere on a map. You wouldn't have like known, or at least the maps we had. You wouldn't have known about it. But some of the locals at the shop were like, no, you need to go down this road. These are the directions you need to take to see this waterfall. And it was just this amazing, like, hidden, beautiful waterfall. Another time somebody said like, well, this is before actually we saw the waterfall, but like, we were going to drive straight from Dublin to Belfast and spend a lot of time in Belfast. And somebody's like, you need to take the scenic route on the coast. So we did that, and that ate up like the entire day. And from where our next Airbnb was, we really didn't get much time in Belfast at all. Like, we basically just went to pubs. But that scenic tour was so beautiful, and we saw, I can't even tell you how many rainbows along the way. It was just peaceful and beautiful. And so I look back at times like that, and I know those are like travel times, but too, like, how if we had stuck to the plan, like, we would have missed a lot of beauty and a lot of other, you know, just times to make us stop and think and appreciate, instead of just being like, I have to rush and I have to hit all these things. And so I feel like I'm becoming more open to that, and even like looking for that. So it's funny, I think about the future and I have absolutely no idea what's going to happen. I don't know, not no idea, like, we'll finish my coursework, hopefully come up with the thing to do my dissertation on, but I don't know like what exactly I'll be doing afterwards. I don't know if we'll, you know, I know we've talked about before, like, I would love to live somewhere else. I'm kind of done with, I've been in California a really long time now, and I'm like, I'm good. But live somewhere else, like, I've always thought it'd be really fun to try to live somewhere internationally for a year or two. But I don't know, but I'm less scared about that than I used to be. Like, I would used to like freak out about that. And I'm like, I don't know, but I'm going to trust that we'll figure it out. So yeah, to be determined, TBD.
Yes.
Or to be emerging.
Ooh, new phrase. Yes. To be emerging. TBE. I love that.
Yeah.
Also, I really love the imagery of taking the scenic route and all the rainbows. Like the story that I have in my head now is really, really beautiful.
I'll send some of the pictures. I think that's my old computer. I haven't started up in forever, so I hope it would still start. But I think most of my pictures are on there, and I need to get them off. But it was really, and that's too where I wish side note, like I wish I had a better camera.
I know, right? Yeah.
Like you don't want to look like the tourist, but if you have like that professional camera, it's just, but you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our conversation today especially was really, really nice, like decompression time. I feel earlier today I was like, was this a good idea? Am I going to be like so wasted by the time it gets to 6:19? But right now I feel energized, and so I'm really appreciative of that and of you.
I'm always appreciative of our conversations, recorded or not.
Same.
Yeah. 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 What about like, well, I know like there's yeah, I don't know of a very good way of saying it, but like, right, the inevitable with your mom's illness, but like, what do you think, like years down the road, I mean, what do you think? Where do you think you will be? What do you think the future will look like for you?
So I observed a class last semester at UCSD, and it was this amazing class because they talked about like real things. Not that we don't talk about real things in our class, but I feel like it was an anthropology class, and so to do ethnography for your dissertation from their perspective, it's an entirely immersive experience, and so they need to kind of like really process what that feels like and looks like. And I really appreciated the depth to which they went in their classes talking about that kind of stuff. And so in the class, I forget what the question was, but one of the other students had shared the story about how he was doing field work in Japan, not for his dissertation, but like pre-dissertation pilot, setting some stuff up. And his mother died, and he was across the world, doc student, not a lot of money, the middle of his research, and he decided not to go home for his funeral, and for his mother's funeral. And he talked about that, and I feel just like this immediate connection, warranted or not. Like whenever somebody shares that they have lost a parent, I want to get to know them more. I want to understand what does that feel like to experience that loss, because I think I'm trying to protect myself and learn so that I can be prepared for that inevitable day when I get that phone call that is emergency or whatever. So I think about that a lot. When I first moved out here, I shared, after I kind of grew my legs a little bit, I shared with several people about my mom, because I knew that I was going to need a network of people to lean on when that happens. And I didn't know when it was going to happen. And so I was like, I might as well start laying groundwork now so that I have people that I can go to. And I didn't get the support that I was necessarily looking for, that I was used to, because the colleagues that I had before, we had kind of like just a family healing between us, and so it was different. And so I was trying to recreate something without allowing it to emerge naturally, I guess, without really consciously knowing that. So anyway, now I feel like, especially with our conversations, I have a more organic network has emerged, and there's people that I know that I can lean on when the time comes, who can just sit with me whenever. And I think that that's really what's the word I'm looking for? Empowering, I guess, to just trust that when that happens, that it's going to be okay, and that there will be people there who can kind of hold my hand and cry with me and do that kind of stuff. I've wondered, like, when I talk about my mom now, depending on what it is and what the moment is, and I guess maybe whatever I'm feeling at the present and however that's aligning with the story from the past, sometimes I get emotional and other times I don't. And so my question for the future is, or something that I wonder sometimes is like, will the triggers always be the same? Will I ever really understand what they are? Am I going to be that person at, 50 years old who cries in front of their students when she's talking about her mom? Or, I don't know. I don't know how I'll mitigate those feelings as I get farther and farther away from this experience. And I also, I'm curious about how the caregiving identity that I've held, how that will carry through the rest of my life as well, because I see that in playing out in certain areas, for better or worse. I think that there's some processing that I need to continue to go through to sort of disentangle my my authentic identity from the caregiving identity. Not that that's not a part of my authentic and lived experience, but that because I was a caregiver doesn't mean that I am a caregiver, if that makes sense. Like, to sort of, anyway, so I think that working through that is going to be a little bit of a thing, to say it so eloquently. So I don't know. I think like you say, it has so many questions. There's a lot of unknowns. I think the unknown that I get most hung up on lately is like, just what is it going to feel like when I can no longer tell a story about my mom in the present tense, even though it already feels like she's already gone, but she's not. And so what is that? When is that reality going to set in, and what is that going to feel like? My grandfather passed away. My last living grandparent, and the only living grandparent that I ever really knew, passed away, I think 2 or 3 summers ago. And we went to his funeral. But the story is just really, I was at a conference when I got the message that he had passed away, and we weren't very close. My dad's family was not really, my dad and his father at least were not super close, and we didn't spend a lot of time there. But I just remember feeling like the weight of the world in that moment, even though we weren't very close to this person, this 80-year-old grandfather. And so if I felt so distinctly the shift in the world in that moment, I don't have a good sense of what it will feel like when it's my mom. And I don't know I'm scared of that.
Yeah.
I think it's what I think of the future, which is, I wish I had your, you said something, and it just sounded very courageous you said something, I trust in the way things will unfold, or something like that. Or maybe that's what I heard about what you said.
I don't feel very courageous very often. But I think that's, that doesn't mean there's not like fear in that. And I don't want to talk over you if you have more to say, but because what's happened in the beginning of this year is we've had some like extra financial hits, and some are tied to the miscarriage and those bills and how little insurance covers. And so too, that's where if we started adoption process again, like we'd be on a slow path again because of what we have to build back up, and obviously I'm in school and whatever. So there's still some fear too on some things of like, are we set up for everything? But I think too, like, I mean, what's currently going on in the world is a reminder that not just in the sense of, it's not even just that it's a reminder. I mean, it is, but there was something that was said when I was in Argentina. We were at Caritas, and they have a couple of ministries they do, but one of them is they have like the homeless ministry where they have a place that people can come live. Specifically men, because 95% of the homeless in Buenos Aires are men. So that's where the need is. Anyway, the director of that aspect of the ministry was saying, like, we are all one step away from homelessness. Like, there's they have people there that were architects, doctors, like we're all, and so that's been really just like sitting with me, but really in my mind lately too, of like, as much as I try to make things secure for myself, like things can happen, and I can try to be secure and have that plan, and it not end up not mattering. So I think that's where it's like more of it's not doing anything, but yeah, trying to lessen the grip, I guess.
Yeah. I just had this thought when we do like our one word or opening thing for class tonight. I was thinking that right now, in this moment anyway, I feel like heartened somehow. Like, in the Grinch, when at the end his heart just like gets bigger and bigger and bigger. That's kind of how I feel right now. I don't know why, but I mean, we're just sharing so honestly, but maybe that's why.
Well, no, I think like things that I feel like people are frustrated, where else so much of our frustration lies, maybe that, but just like this, because there's a lack of authenticity, and because we create, like, even though we say we want authenticity, like we create or perpetuate systems of and habits of inauthenticity. And so I feel like that, I don't know, that's where I feel like too, when I can like find it, like I want to seize onto it and like not let that go.
Yeah.
So like I feel very hopeful right now, and a lot of other things, but if I had to narrow down one word.